Can I ask members to leave quietly, please, because I want to press on at this time of night. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 23117 in the name of Graham Simpson on bus service cuts. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Graham Simpson to open the debate. Mr Simpson, please.
Well, thank you very much. And can I first of all thank all the members who signed the motion to allow this debate to take place, and can also thank the members, the few members who have stayed back. I understand the reasons for that, because it is very late. There won't be a single MSP who's not seen a decline in bus services during the pandemic, but in truth the decline has been going on for much longer than that. So I'm looking forward to hearing about the picture across the country and to people's ideas for how we move forward. Because the reason for tabling the motion was not to score political points. I welcome the money put in by the Scottish Government during the current crisis, and it's been vital. But I think we need to start a serious conversation about what we want our public transport system to be like and how it can emerge once we're through the pandemic. The motion says that hundreds of bus services have been cut since March, and that's true. According to the Traffic Commissioner, between March the 1st and November the 30th, a total of 241 bus services were cancelled in Scotland. So thousands of people who may rely on the bus now either have no service or a worse service than before. However, it's not quite that simple, because hundreds of services were cut or altered, but many have been reinstated. My fear, though, is that they may be lost again once the massive subsidies being provided by government ends, as they will. In my view, some bus companies have taken the opportunity during COVID-19 to get rid of services that they may have been looking to be rid of for some time. Now, in the area where I live in East Kilbride, that's definitely the case, and it's why I brought this debate today. I live in Stewartfield, probably the most affluent part of the town. I've lived there for 25 years, and in all that time, our bus services has been woeful. A bus once every half an hour that would get you one way into the town centre, but very much around the houses, and the other way into Glasgow. The buses were old and the service was hit and miss, and it's little wonder that most people didn't bother with it and that car use is high, because there really is no alternative. But some people don't have a car and needed a bus, so when First tried a few years ago to axe the service, I, as a local councillor at the time, ran a big campaign and we managed to stop the cut. And that's how it stayed until COVID struck. The already low numbers on a poor service got even lower, and First just stopped running the 31 to East Kilbride. They were not prepared to act on pleas to consider potentially more viable routes, so Stewartfield was cast aside. And all we could do was appeal to SPT to help, and despite being seriously cash-strapped themselves, they funded a replacement service with a different operator, but it's only once an hour. And my view is that long-term it can't work, and that we need to do much better, though I'm told that passenger numbers so far are quite promising. My experience isn't unique, but it highlights something that's wrong with the current system. In many parts of the country, we have a hodgepodge of operators. In my own region, that Strathclyde region that I mentioned, there are over 50 different operators. Buses can lead the green recovery through companies like Alexander Dennis in my own region. I hope they benefit from the Green Bus Fund announced by the Chancellor and for which I lobbied behind the scenes. Now, bus is by far the most popular public transport mode in Strathclyde. It carries more than twice as many passengers as rail, but numbers using buses have been falling for years. According to SPT, bus patronage in Strathclyde and South West Scotland declined from 234 million to 159 million journeys in the 10 years from 2008-2009. So that's a drop of 32%. You can't blame bus companies for pulling routes that lose money, but SPT, which is itself funded by cash-strapped councils, then steps in sometimes when it can to pick up the pieces. The number of services SPT currently supports is 216. That covers a network of about 7.9 million miles a year, or around 152,000 miles per week. 10% of the total miles operated in the region. But here's the rub. SPT's annual revenue budget for supported services is around £13 million, or about £5 per head of population per year, not per passenger, per head of population. If you compare that with the level of subsidy for bus services per head of population in Greater Manchester, that's £10, and in London, it's £75. If you want a gold standard public transport system, it has to be paid for. I agree with SPT's call for a Scottish bus task force to be set up to tackle the issues and to recommend the way forward, because there's no easy answer to this. What we can agree on, though, should be that the best public transport systems are joined up, easy to use and easy to understand, and that there should be no deserts where people have no choice but to drive. If public subsidies are needed for that, then so be it. Ideologies must not get in the way. Public transport is a good thing. Part 3 of the Transport Scotland Act 2019 allows for the creation of bus service improvement partnerships by one or more councils. This would enable them to set standards on routes, fares and ticketing. Councils could also run their own services. Some councils are interested in this, Aberdeen, for example, and Falkirk. And I think it could be a good thing in my own patch, where the reality of people's travels patterns is that they're in and between Glasgow, Lanarkshire, Renfrewshire. Yes, I'll give way.
Jamie Green.
I know it's unusual to give way on your own benches, but it raises a fair point. I spent many a sleepless night on the transport bill, but isn't it the problem is that local councils who may have a wish and a want to set up a bus service to meet the needs of local residents, they simply don't have the money, and therein lies the problem.
Graham Simpson.
Money is certainly an issue, and that's I've mentioned that already. Jamie Green's absolutely right. It does come down to money, but those travel patterns in that region are between council areas. So if we're going to do something, it should be on a regional level. Now, many of the provisions in the Transport Act, including that, are yet to come into force, and the cynic in me says that's because they'll be unpopular before an election. But this is not in that category, so I fail to understand the delay. So let's all get behind the message that buses are good and necessary, and let's start a national conversation on how best to provide a proper, fully integrated public transport system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Simpson. I now call Stuart Stevenson to be followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Graham Simpson for bringing this subject to Parliament. I must say, I was green with envy to hear that in his local area there's a half-hourly bus service. My local village, where the only service is the 301 service heading broadly east and west, we would dearly love to have a half-hourly service. And indeed, on one occasion from the second village away, I travelled cross-country to catch a train on the only bus that was running on a Sunday. And during the entire hour and a half on that bus, I was the only passenger. So bus services are important because they're important for individual passengers. You don't need to fill the bus for it to be an important service. However, I think it's as well, particularly for Graham Simpson and his political viewpoint, to remind ourselves why we have a very successful municipally owned bus service in Edinburgh, and why we basically do not have the same elsewhere across Scotland. And that is simply because his political party caused the bus services to be sold off. So the excellent Aberdeen bus service that I used as a student, I normally travelled on the number 1 route, the number 10 route, I beg your pardon. Very effective, very frequent and very affordable, but it was sold off. And the difficulty that, and where did profits from that go? Well, they didn't go back to Aberdeen to invest in bus services. Edinburgh Auction managed to retain the asset, the bus service and the successful Lothian bus services, which I use on a not regular but not irregular basis. So if we're to see councils across Scotland or Strathclyde Passenger Transport starting their own bus companies, we're looking at very substantial capital investments to recoup the amount of money that was given away, in essence, by privatising the previous municipal bus services. I'm quite astonished to hear Graham Simpson complain that there are 50 private bus companies operating in Strathclyde, and almost the suggestion that he wants to replace that by one municipal one. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with that proposal, but it is fundamentally more difficult than perhaps his speech suggested. The thing he also referred to, of course, which is perfectly correct, that there are other ways than running your own bus services that you can see local support for bus services by supporting individual routes. Indeed, the one I referred to that I travelled on a Sunday was a council-supported route that wouldn't be there if the council weren't investing in it. And the question I think we've got to ask ourselves, for which I do not have the answer, is what is the cost going to be per passenger, per journey, for the councils supporting individual routes that are contracted to private operators, or community bus services for that matter, or investing the substantial capital amount of money that's involved in setting up their own bus company. And I think that's one of the key questions. Now, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we are looking at the lack of the Transport Act 2019. In relation to municipally owned and operated bus services, of course, we need high standards of governance and supervision of what's quite a substantial undertaking for a local council to contemplate. So I'm not hugely surprised that it will take a while to bring forward the commencement order of that facility. Nonetheless, the subject is a very proper subject to be brought to Parliament. I just think it may be more complex than perhaps Graham Simpson has provided for in his motion and his speech. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Stevens. I call Colin Smith to be followed by Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Graham Simpson for tabling his motion and allowing Parliament the opportunity to highlight the importance of our bus services and, crucially, the big challenges they face in the months ahead. Presiding Officer, as Graham Simpson rightly highlighted, well, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on public transport. In many ways, when it comes to our buses, it hasn't actually created any new problems, it's actually compounded those that already exist. Even before the pandemic last year, bus journeys plummeted by 14 million, adding to a downward trend that has seen numbers fall by a quarter under the current government. In communities right across Scotland, vital bus networks were on the brink of collapse even before COVID. Now, without meaningful change, that collapse is going to be inevitable in many communities. Now, I recognise very much the funding that has gone to supporting the bus sector during this period. It's very welcome, but we all know this is a sticking plaster. We need to provide financial support to sustain the sector in the months ahead, but we also need to give transport authorities the powers to rebuild and recover in the future. And implementing the 2019 Transport Act provisions on bus services is a key part of this. When this Act was passed by Parliament, the Cabinet Secretary said the bill offers an ambitious new model for improving bus services and will ensure that there will be sustainable bus networks across Scotland. Well, frankly, there has never been a stronger need for that than it is now. Now, I would have liked to have seen that Act go a lot further, but it does provide for greater regulation of services through bus service improvement plans and franchising, and crucially, it lifts the unfair ban on municipal ownership. I have to say it's been quite amusing watching an SNP politician arguing against public ownership and municipal ownership with a Conservative politician. How times have changed in a very positive way. And having moved the amendments at stage 2 to secure the lifting of that ban, which were ultimately implemented through stage 3, I did so because I strongly believe that greater municipal ownership will help to ensure communities and passengers are put first when it comes to our bus service. It reflects that principle that I have, that public transport is very much a public service. But as Jamie Green highlighted, I think councils not only need the powers from the Transport Act, they also need the financial support to use them, a point that was emphasised by SPT in their briefing. Now, protecting Scotland's bus network is not only absolutely essential to our economy and to connecting communities, it also has a positive impact on wider policy priorities, from carbon reduction to public health. Indeed, for every £1 invested in supporting socially necessary bus services, it delivers £3 of wider societal benefits. With vaccinations underway this week, which is hugely welcome, and an end to the COVID pandemic thankfully in sight, albeit months ahead, it is time to start to take a more strategic long-term planning approach to the future of bus services. What will happen when we move forward and begin to move away from that pandemic? So that means getting ownership and regulation right and giving our councils the resources they need. It means tackling the long-term trends with meaningful action and investment. This long-term investment in bus priority infrastructure, for example, from the government, is something that will make a difference, and it is important, but it has been entirely undermined, I believe, by the decision to restrict bus partnership funds to authorities pursuing bus service improvement plans. Instead of ensuring this money goes where it is needed most, it is being used, in my view, to strong-arm authorities into using the government's preferred model for running services. Likewise, I welcome the government's commitment to introduce free bus travel for young people, which Labour have long argued for and would promote a much-needed modal shift towards buses. However, I'm disappointed this has been limited to just those under the age of 19, and its introduction, sadly, has been delayed. This should be a key priority, and it should, in my view, be the first step towards expanding the concessionary travel scheme further in the future. Presiding Officer, in concluding, buses continue to make up the majority of public transport journeys in Scotland, and this year has made clearer than ever the essential role they play. So I want to finish by paying tribute to our key transport workers. They've worked round the clock to keep Scotland moving, to get our other key workers into work, and that's hugely important, and their role will be incredibly important as we try to rebuild those services in the years ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. I call Angus MacDonald to be followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There won't be many in this Parliament, if any, who don't share some of Graham Simpson's concerns detailed in his motion being debated this evening. And there's no doubt that Scotland has a patchy bus network in places with room for improvement. However, I'm glad the motion recognises the support given to bus companies by the Scottish Government during the COVID-19 pandemic, because that's probably the most salient point in this debate. We're here because of COVID, not because anyone wishes to see bus services in Scotland being cut. But the reality is that the running of many bus services is uneconomic, and not just in rural areas, but also in urban areas where I often see one or two people at most sitting on a gas-guzzling bus, often a 20-year-old gas-guzzling bus, belching out fumes that would be frowned upon in a third world country, never mind a first world country such as ours. A clue perhaps to why transport represents Scotland's biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, there is a solution in that regard. In the neighbouring constituency to mine in Falkirk West, represented by the Transport Minister, Michael Matheson, we have the world-class bus manufacturer, Alexander Dennis. Now, we'll all have seen the restructuring plans announced by Alexander Dennis last August as a result of COVID inducing a slump in demand for new buses. And I was pleased at the time to receive an assurance from the Transport Secretary that the Scottish Government, in line with their historic support for bus manufacturing in Scotland, were exploring every option they could to support our bus manufacturers, including Alexander Dennis, through this current challenging period. We have a bus manufacturing sector that leads the world in cutting-edge and sustainable technology, and with that comes a significant number of jobs that the sector supports. This is something we're already proud of, but it's something we should work to support where we can, and I'm glad that the Scottish Government shares that view. Now, we all hopefully understand that these are challenging times for businesses and communities as a whole, not least the manufacturing industries. For example, we've seen Honda in England today announcing a halt to production due to blockages at ports, preventing parts getting through, and that's even before the impact of the Brexit chaos that we're all dreading. But with Alexander Dennis producing world-class hybrid buses, and now the world-beating hydrogen-powered Enviro 400 FC, which has an electric arrive time driveline with axle-mounted motors and an onboard battery which is charging or charged by feeding hydrogen from secure tanks to a fuel cell system where it's converted to electricity. No external battery charging is required in the vehicle's only emission is water vapour. Hydrogen fuel cell technology is here. It's in Falkirk and it can offer long-range zero-emission capability if suitable infrastructure can be put in place with sustainably sourced hydrogen. So I'm sure we all welcome, as has already been discussed this evening, the opportunities last year's Transport Scotland Act brings, in particular the powers to allow local authorities to run bus services. And I'm as impatient as everyone else to see that happening, as it has the potential to reinvigorate Scotland's bus networks. However, I take on board the warnings raised by Stuart Stevenson in his speech. However, a number of local authorities have already started exploring this option, but face financial barriers in implementing schemes themselves, as Jamie Green alluded to in his intervention. So I share the frustration of many that these powers have not yet been enacted, although I get that the concentration of officials has been elsewhere in recent months. However, I note Friends of the Earth Scotland's call in their briefing for this debate for the Scottish Government to bring these powers forward to repair Scotland's patchy bus service, create green jobs and contribute to decarbonising transport. And I trust the Minister will also take note of their call. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms MacDonald. I call Monica Lennon, the last speaker in the open debate, please. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Graham Simpson, who is a fellow Central Scotland MSP, for bringing this motion forward for debate. I completely agree with Graham Simpson that in Central Scotland, like other parts of the country, we have been left without adequate bus services in some of our communities during 2020. But as Colin Smith and others have alluded to, this is not just a COVID challenge, and the issues have been facing our communities for some time. But it is good that we're having the debate tonight. I've spoken up in Parliament before about the X1 bus service between Hamilton and Glasgow, and I'm extremely disappointed that First Glasgow have axed the Vital route this year. They tried to do it before the pandemic and were forced to pause because of a people-powered campaign in our local areas. People strongly backed the Vital route. So it's really disappointing that First have gone ahead with the axing of the service this year under the cover of COVID. And I am disappointed the Scottish Government hasn't done more to intervene and to help save this lifeline service. We've seen similar issues in East Kilbride. I know that Graham Simpson knows the matter well with the axing of the number 31 bus too. And these buses are relied upon by workers, by students, by young and old alike. The X1, for example, is a direct link between my local community in Hamilton to the Royal Infirmary in Glasgow. And I could paper the walls with comments, both on Facebook and by email, from constituents who strongly support the X1 because they rely on it. If I give one example from one letter I received, they said the X1 is a vital service for those who live in High Ernock. It's the only bus that goes around Davington Drive. Axing this service would mean elderly and vulnerable residents having to walk 15 minutes to the closest bus stop on Wellhall Road, which can be prone to black ice during the winter. And it may lead to residents not wanting to leave their house for shopping, as they may not be able to afford a taxi. The X1 is widely used by students. The bus is a lot cheaper and more reliable than the train. It stops outside Strathclyde University, City of Glasgow College and Glasgow Caledonian University. And the letter continues, I am a student nurse who used the bus service from High Ernock to Buchanan bus station. I could get off at Glasgow Royal Infirmary during my placement along with fellow students and workers. And I would add to that that I've had many constituents say that they rely on the bus service for regular appointments to Glasgow Royal Infirmary. It's clear that the monopoly of provision has meant that public petitions and pleas from local politicians and residents have been ignored. The public are being let down, Activists like those behind the Get Glasgow Moving campaign, which was launched back in 2016, should be supported. Running public services for profit ultimately means that people are going to be let down, and that's unfortunately what's happening to too many of our constituents. So for too long, I would agree with my colleague Colin Smith that bus services have been left deregulated with little investment. And it is a real shame that Alexander Dennis and Falkirk, who should be at the forefront of electric bus creation, announced job cuts earlier this year because of lack of demand. We need to support these businesses. We do need publicly funded and accountable local transport that puts people before profit and helps us tackle climate change. And in closing, Presiding Officer, I would finish by observing I'm the only woman to speak in the debate. Women make up the majority of bus users, so let's make sure that we get transport policy that is inclusive and supports all of our communities, helps our economy, helps our environment, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Lennon. And I call on Paul Wheelhouse to close to the Government. Minister, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank Graham Simpson for bringing this motion forward on what's clearly an important issue to many members and their communities across the Chamber. So thanks also to members across the Chamber as well, of course, for their contributions today and for sharing a range of views that highlight the vital role that bus services play for people across Scotland. I also want to take this opportunity, Presiding Officer, to add to what was said by Colin Smith, to pay tribute to our Scotland's transport workers, because I'm extremely grateful, as I know the Cabinet Secretary is, for the way our transport community has come together and made sure that our transport system continues to support essential journeys in a safe way during the pandemic, and as well for the engagement of the trade unions and workers across the sector in helping develop the guidance that allowed that to happen. That's very important. Presiding Officer, the impact of COVID-19 on public transport has been unprecedented, and Angus MacDonald in particular made that point well. Demand for public transport plummeted overnight as we went into the initial national lockdown. But patronage today is still significantly lower than levels before COVID, in line with government guidance and restrictions on travel. And this is a primary driver for why the Scottish Government has had to commit a total of £546 million in the current financial year to sustain operations across public transport networks. Relevant to today's debate, as others have touched on, bus patronage is currently about 45% of the pre-COVID levels, though this is with significant variation across the country, where there's high demand in some places and lower elsewhere. But our transport priority has been and remains to keep public transport running for those who need it while capacity is reduced due to physical distancing. And to maintain a viable and safe bus network within the funding I just mentioned, we have committed up to £162.3 million in additional financial support for bus services since coming out of the national lockdown in June of this year. And I certainly thank members for the positive remarks they've made around the support from the Scottish Government. I recognise that it's not an issue of political debate here. But crucially, this is in addition to maintaining concessionary reimbursement and bus service operator grant payments at levels forecast before COVID-19, clearly when demand was much higher, where we could normally spend over £260 million in the financial year. And it's also in addition to the money which local authorities normally receive through the Local Authority General Revenue Grant to secure additional bus services which are socially necessary but not commercially viable in their own right. And in 2018-19, £57 million was spent in this way. The extra funding fills the gap between the additional costs of running services with COVID protection in place and severely reduced ticket income due to carrying capacity constraints as a result of both the physical distancing and reduced demand. And operators who have received this funding are not allowed to make a profit as their terms of their public service contracts with the Scottish Government. And without this additional funding, services would not have increased from around 30% of pre-COVID levels being operated during the national lockdown to what we see run today. Notwithstanding lower patronage figures I cited, the largest bus operators are now running on average almost 95% of pre-COVID mileage. But in some places, operators are running below 100% due to lack of driver availability because perhaps of sickness, self-isolation, or because the drivers themselves are having to shield. Elsewhere, operators are running below 100% in agreement with Transport Scotland because the demand is just not there, frankly, at the moment. And patronage remains particularly low in places like Edinburgh, ironically, while the office-based commuters follow government guidance to work from home where possible to do so. So it's important to clarify that even with the additional funding, 100% of normal service mileage does not necessarily mean there will be 100% of normal capacity on the bus network because of these changes. And physical distancing means buses can carry fewer passengers than normal. 1 metre physical distancing can reduce the carrying capacity in a bus to as little as 35% of its normal capacity. And bus operators, in consultation with local authorities, local transport authorities, and this is an important point, have to make difficult decisions about where best to deploy the capacity they have to meet current demand, perhaps increasing the number of buses on a route to cope with the additional pressures on capacity and reduce the risk of overcrowding and maintain basic connectivity as well. I'll give way to the member.
Jamie Green.
Sorry to keep members late. I know the clock is ticking, but on that point, even after the pandemic, and we all look forward to that, it's difficult to see how patronage numbers will get up to the levels even that we're at before COVID, which were already in decline. I'm hoping somewhere in the summing up we'll hear what the government's plan is to introduce that, and if at any point they might consider a proposition that I put forward during the Transport Bill for a proper multi-mode national ticketing system.
Minister.
I would perhaps raise that issue myself with the Cabinet Secretary around the multi-mode ticketing issue. That's not something that I've discussed with the Cabinet Secretary, but the member is right, certainly, that there is a concern about the long lag time it may take to recover passenger demand to pre-COVID levels. He's also right, obviously we're concerned about long-term decline in passenger numbers, as Graham Simpson and other colleagues have commented on. But I'll come on to what we're trying to do to restore that in terms of bus priority funding. But it's certainly, we can see that operators are redeploying vehicles across the network, as I say, to places where demand is high and there's a risk of overcrowding, which necessarily then impacts on the availability of buses for other services. So I recognise that challenge, and I don't know whether it's specific to the points that have been raised by Monica Lennon or by Graham Simpson in terms of local routes, but certainly that may be one factor. And it's right, the decisions about local bus service provision are determined locally. We agree, I think, across the chamber on that, where that's possible to do so. And that's why it is a condition of our funding that bus operators are required to consult and cooperate with local transport authorities when they're planning services. They must respond positively and quickly to reasonable requests from local transport authorities to amend provision where the local transport authority thinks that's merited. And operators are required to keep bus services under review in consultation with those local transport authorities to make sure that provision is in line with demand. And hence that may be relevant to the points being made, for example, in regards to the X1 service that Monica Lennon quoted, and indeed Graham Simpson, in terms of any kind of pent-up demand there is for those services to return. Turning now to the bus provisions in the Transport Act 2019, which are points being raised by Angus MacDonald, by Monica Lennon, and I think by Graham Simpson and other colleagues in the chamber. Implementation was necessarily paused as a result of the pandemic. That's obviously regrettable, but it had to be done, as Angus MacDonald indicated, and I think Stuart Stevenson also. Officials have now restarted that work in earnest, though, which will be taken forward subject to the parliamentary timetable. The limited available parliamentary time this session has been prioritised for essential legislation, including the government's COVID response and making the necessary preparations for the end of the EU exit transition period. Powers already do exist, though, to secure additional bus services to meet local needs. The new powers under the Act extend the range of options available to local authorities and regional transport partnerships to improve services in their area, be it partnership working or local franchising, or indeed running their own bus services. I give way to the member.
Simpson.
Can I thank the Minister for taking the intervention? When is the earliest that he thinks the provisions will be introduced? I mean, I accept the reason for a delay, but there is a demand there to have these powers.
Minister.
As I indicated, Presiding Officer, in just the earlier remarks, but just to build on that point, we are expecting that a number of the measures in the Act will not come into effect until the next parliamentary session. However, just that being said, in terms of the bus service provisions in the Act, which are the ones that I believe the member is most interested in, a good deal of preparatory work was being undertaken prior to the pandemic on the significant volume of regulations, guidance and related consultation processes required to support them implementation. Angus MacDonald was quite right in saying that it's a complex situation. The implementation project is technically complex and requires significant engagement with stakeholders who themselves have had limited capacity to engage in recent months. But as with all other aspects of the Act, officials have now recommenced that work and Parliament will be kept updated accordingly. So I will certainly encourage colleagues to make sure we are keeping the member and others informed of that work as it progresses. But regrettably, some provisions of the Act will have to probably slip into the next parliamentary session, if that's helpful to the member. Certainly in terms of the in closing, Presiding Officer, and just pick up one perhaps other issue in doing so, Frequent, fast and reliable bus services are at the heart of a sustainable, inclusive transport system. I think we all agree on that. And this perhaps has to be the solution to address the historic decline in patronage and also to rebuild to where we were prior to COVID-19 coming into part. And that's why we have launched the Bus Partnership Fund, the £500 million Bus Partnership Fund, supporting local authorities' ambitions to tackle the negative impact of congestion in bus services with permanent bus priority infrastructure to make those services more reliable, faster and therefore more attractive to attract people out of their cars into bus patronage. So this will make, as I say, the bus journeys quicker, more reliable and encourage them to do that. And in particular, included within the 500 million I've already referenced, is the £10 million Bus Priority Rapid Deployment Fund, which is a capital funding pot which has already been seen funding awards to the Highland Council, Dundee City Council, Glasgow City Region and Edinburgh and the South East Region. I appreciate that's not covering the whole country, but there are particular areas that are being targeted through that. I don't know whether that will benefit the area in Lanarkshire, which Mr Simpson was referring to in terms of East Kilbride, or indeed Monica Lennon referencing the issues around Glasgow and the impact on students. But we remain engaged with operators, regional transport partnerships and local authorities to keep under review the financial support that's necessary to maintain a viable bus network and to secure public transport's place at the heart of our transport system beyond COVID. And therefore I would sort of say to Mr Smith in terms of that there is a good culture, I think, in developing in terms of engagement with local authorities, which may address the point he's raising. In a final point, Presiding Officer, just to reference in regards to the points that were made by members regarding Alexander Dennis Limited, I absolutely agree with them. Alexander Dennis is a very important business in terms of the bus manufacturing sector. In September, colleagues may remember that £7.4 million was awarded towards 41 new electric buses and associated infrastructure through the Scottish Ultra Low Emissions Bus Scheme. And 35 of those electric buses will be built in Scotland by Alexander Dennis. That's really positive. And indeed, there's further funding being awarded to retrofitting of midlife buses to become Euro 6 compliant, and thus in line with low emission zone regulations for clean air, for example, in Glasgow. I should also just finish, Presiding Officer, on the important point that was referenced by Angus MacDonald around hydrogen. I fully agree with him. Hydrogen fuel technology has a very important role to play. Members will hopefully see soon our hydrogen assessment project, which will be published, which will give further detail on the demand case for hydrogen in the Scottish economy, in particular looking at areas such as hydrogen in the transport system, particularly heavy vehicles like buses, like HGVs. And I think that will be very instructive in giving a scale of the market demand in Scotland. So I look forward to seeing that myself. And finally, Presiding Officer, just to thank all members for their contributions today. Stretching a bit, perhaps. Just to thank all members.
Just good to say, Minister, I don't know any finallys you've put in there, but I hope finally you've reached your finally.
I have indeed, Presiding Officer. Just to thank members and yourself, Presiding Officer, for this debate tonight. And I think it's been very good debate and has brought light to some very important issues in relation to public transport services. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate and I close this meeting of Parliament.